today is going to be about code inspection for PowerBuilder, but not only for PowerBuilder. We're going to briefly mention that this can also support other languages, but we will focus primarily on PowerBuilder. Code inspection is a part of the feature that Visual Expert can provide after reading your code. There are different categories of problems that we can address, security vulnerabilities, bugs, and maintainability issues. This one, you want to fix them as soon as possible, and this one, it's usually up for debate. If you have time, if it's reasonable, you go for it. It depends also on the severity, because there are different categories of severity, from critical to minor. We will also see how this is working. And we do support 3 languages, so there's about, now that we've been adding more, so now I think we're close to 100 different rules for PowerBuilder, pretty much close to 200 for Oracle and 80 for SQL Server. One rule is basically, as it says, a rule that the code should comply with. So when we inspect your code, we will take every object, and in each object, we will take every method. And for each method, each piece of code, we will check against hundreds of different rules to extract what's not compliant in your code. When can we do that? So like I said, we have different strategies. First of all, when it comes to triggering the code inspection, you can either do that on demand. So I'm starting, or I just published a new version and I want to start manually the process. So there's a button, you click on it and you're good to go. It's going to end up automatically. You can also integrate, and we'll talk about that a bit later, but you can also integrate Visual Expert with your continuous integration pipeline. And if you're using GitLab or Jenkins, so you might want to add a job in your workflow. And this job will consist in executing Visual Expert, opening the project, analyzing the code, generating results in particular. There's also an embedded scheduler with Visual Expert that allows you to refresh the code inspection on a regular basis, like every day, every week, if you like, for example. And you can also wake up Visual Expert and manipulate these code inspection features with a command line if you want to create yourself a step in some internal process that you're managing manually. Once the code inspection process is started, we will then fetch the code from different sources. So for PowerBuilder, it's going to be typically either PBLs and workspace targets that you can find on a Windows folder. But sometimes it's going to be in a repository. It could be a GitHub, TFS, now Azure DevOps or SVN. And for the database code, pretty much the same, plus the database itself, depending on your development, organization, and the methods. Some team would prefer to write code and store the code in file. Others would directly store it in the database. In both cases, we will fetch the code wherever it is. We will run the code analysis and inspect the code and generate the result, save them in the repository. So let's see a few examples about how this is working. This is where you will see the code at component level. So for a PowerBuilder application, you would see object, methods, libraries, etc. If you find a certain piece of code that includes source code, you would see the source code on the right-hand side right here. That's for an event anytime you need. And then in this part, we have what we call the navigation bar. And that includes different features grouped by categories: cross-reference, impact analysis, documentation, code review, that is going to be of interest today, performance analysis, etc. Now, when it comes to code inspection in particular, you might want to start with this dashboard that includes some high-level indicators. You would see on the top something like a grade, for each category in terms of reliability, security, maintainability, depending on the number of issues found for that particular category, compared to the volume of your code. So this is based on the ratio, number of problems divided by the size of the code, because having 100 problems is not the same if you have a small application or a huge application. The severity and the grade is going to be different. In this section here, you're going to break down the problems by severity. You see, minor, major, critical, etc. Right here, you will break down the same problems by type. And this is where you will find bugs or security vulnerabilities. And you see maintainability. Most of the volume is coming from maintainability. You have important stuff and you have also small details that, okay, you may want to address, but that's, let's say, priority 2. This is P1. Vulnerabilities and bugs, this is something you want to address. Security for obvious reason, and bugs means it will break. It's not possibly, I don't know. Yeah, it's going to break. It's going to create a problem sooner or later. So you might as well take care of it right now. If we go down, there's another slice of information here. We can find what we call the remediation cost. Remediation cost is, as it says here, how much does it cost to fix bugs and vulnerabilities? Basically, the most important problems. And below we have the technical debt, and this is for fixing maintainability issues. It's a debt because the concept is you do not have to do that, but it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you in terms of spending more time maintaining and understanding the code, or generating more bugs that you will have to fix eventually. So it's a debt that you will have to pay sooner or later, either by having more work and generating problems or by fixing the problems. And in both cases, we've been evaluating the workload. And there are some settings that I will show you later. By default, for each category of problem, we've been assigning a time to fix it. But this is something you can adjust. You can say, no, in my case, it's easy. This type of problem is quicker to fix. And you can adjust the duration to fix each category of problems. But bottom line, you will get this estimation and a breakdown of this estimation by severity. And again, we can see here that bugs and vulnerabilities are frequently of critical severity, whereas maintainability is lower in the severity. So this is a first level of information, and you can drill down to reach a second level of information. So if I want to focus on all major problems, I double click on it, and this is going to open a second dashboard, a sub dashboard, let's call it like that. On the top, you will see the evolutions in terms of how many issues of that severity, major issues, are found over time. And each dot in this line is a new code analysis, and you have the dates right here. So this is a way for, let's say, project leaders to get a quick overview about the trend. Are the things getting better, getting worse? How is it evolving over time? And you have the same kind of evolution, but this time for technical debt and remediation costs. In both cases, the dashboard and the sub-dashboard, you can simply print it out or export it if you want to pass it over to someone else. And below, we have a list of rules for that category corresponding to major issues in that particular case, because this is what we double-clicked on. And for each rule, we have several information. So number one, a reminder about the type and severity. We have the description of the rule with a simple title, the number of problems found, the corresponding depth or remediation cost, depending on the nature of the problem. And if you double click on one of these rules, so I don't know, let's pick one of them. If I click on this one, you get here a page explaining, it's a documentation for that particular rule where you have a description, the reason why you should comply with this rule, and examples of non-compliant and compliant code to illustrate what's expected and what you should not have in your code. And then below this node on the left-hand side, you have all the places in your application where this rule was not followed. As you can see, it's presented in a tree view, and it's sorted by container. So There is this application containing a PBL here. I can close the PBL. There's a second one, a third one. So it's spread across several PBLs. And for each PBL, then I have object that I can open and close as well. And for each object, I have methods. And if I click on one of these, I would see the source code, and there's a red pin and a yellow highlight pointing at the part that is not complying with the code. Okay. So this is for that particular rule, but you have the same for all the rules that we find in the dashboard. Now, there's another way of exploring instead of going through dashboard, sub-dashboard, list of rules, etc. There's another way of going straight to the point. If you know what you're looking for, you can directly come here. So in this project, I have two nodes under the section code inspection, one for PowerBuilder, the other one for Oracle, because it's an application composed of both client code and database code. So I did put them all together. There are many cases where it's very useful if you want to navigate and understand the code and jump from the client side to the backend side. If you want to review some performance issues, if you want to do some performance tuning, it's better to have a global overview of, again, client and server side, etc. So I have this two type of code here. If I focus only on the PowerBuilder, I can either open a complete list, simple double click would do that, but I can also come here, and in this item of the navigation bar, you see there's here a small button that allows to set some parameter to filter this list. And just like that, I can, for example, include only security problems that are of severity critical. And if I do execute this, I have a subset that is corresponding exactly to the selection I have. Right here, I have the number of problems found. And exactly like before, I can know more. If I double click on it, I have a description about this rule, non-compliant code example and compliant code examples. And again, if I click on an item, I will see the place that is not complying with the rule. And if I'm hovering this, there's a reminder about the rule, its category and severity. So that's another way of exploring the result. And you can see here that there's a green icon. So if I just open the entire list, sometimes you see there's a red one. So we will see later what this means. Because some rule, some points are failed and other are successfully checked. We will discuss that a bit later. Okay, the final point I wanted to mention is that you can also explore the result not in the UI, but in a documentation, in a report that we generate if you need. It's an HTML report, and I guess I can find a copy right here. So you can, for example, configure Visual Expert to generate this set of HTML pages somewhere on the network for all your colleagues to take a look if and when they need that. But then you will find, again, similar information. So there are different points of verification. Here you have code inspection with all the rules we already mentioned. And for each rule, you have, again, description, the list of problems, where the list of functions where the problem is found, etc. Pretty much similar. It's just less flexible than the UI, and it's in static files, HTML file that you generate on the network, but that's something you can export and ship out to other people if you need. Okay, coming back here, let me show you some settings that you can play with to adjust a bit the code inspection. If you go to the tab settings here and open this page by clicking on button more settings, you will see on the left there's a tab here called code inspection. You can find here all the rules by language. And for each rule, there are different type of information. So you can find here, of course, the name, but also the category, the severity, and this is the value you can adjust. This is for technical debt and remediation cost. We did enter a default value, but you can change it if you like. And you see that in some cases, there is a button called Edit. This is for adjusting the behavior of the rule. So let me reduce a bit. No, it's okay. If I click here, you see there is this rule called, what's this one? It's called line should not be too long. Okay, so, but what is a long line? What's the maximum? So by default, it's set to 100 lines, but in your case, if you think this value is not relevant, you can adjust it, bigger, smaller, you figure it out. And there are different cases like that where we need some time to adjust. Sometimes you want to exclude some specific piece of code, otherwise you will have false positives. There are different possibilities of editing the parameters for a given rule. Okay, that's for a generic description of the code inspection process. Now, let's go back here and talk a bit more about continuous integration. So the concept is, I don't know if you're using or if you're familiar with the concept of continuous integration, but there's a process like that where at some point you would generate a new build, either manually or automatically with a automation server like Jenkins or GitLab. When the new build is available, you can implement automated testing to run with a robot automatically a number of regression tests and find by running the application, not visual expert static analysis, but really running the application, find some problems. For PowerBuilder, I don't know if you already tried that, but you can try essential test because this is highly specialized in PowerBuilder application, and there's a tight collaboration between the team developing essential test and the Appian team that is developing PowerBuilder. Anyway, something goes wrong, there's a test report going back here, and you get the results. With Visual Expert, we will have the equivalent, but this is not when running the application. Obviously, this is when running a static code analysis. We just read the code, but then the concept is the same. We can send a report for the people in charge to evaluate if it's good or not. So do we pass all the tests? Yes, no. If no, go back to the developer. If yes, then you can deploy. But at a high level, that's the idea. And like we mentioned, as we mentioned before, you can automate the code inspection, the execution, the starting point of the code inspection by, for example, integrating this with Jenkins or GitLab, or running with a command line if needed, and get the result automatically. Let's focus a bit more about this result and the integration with Jenkins. First of all, you can set the right expectation. What does that mean? Depending on the status of your application and the size and its history, what is acceptable for you may not be acceptable for another team. So we've been defining like that some inspection profiles. You can select which one is suitable in your case. It goes from ideal, where everything should be pretty much perfect, and the lowest level is legacy code. Legacy code is when you're at the beginning and you have, I don't know, 5 gigabytes of code that has been developed for 25 years. And yes, we do see that on a regular basis with PowerBuilder. Well, no way you're going to fix everything overnight. So you need some leniency. You need to find some proper target. And then you go step by step and you can climb and go higher in the level of expectation. And there's also a custom profile where you can define for each rule what's your expectation. And if you think that what we predefined is not good enough because there are some rules, no, I definitely want to ignore them, but this one, they are mandatory, we have to follow them, then this is where you want to set exactly your own profile. When this is done, you will run the code analysis and we will export the results if needed. You can view the result, as we said, in the UI, of course. But if you need, we can export them in a standard format that is corresponding to a tool called JUnit. And this type of format is understood by most automation server, including Jenkins, GitLab, etc. And then they have some internal plugins, standard plugin to read this data and represent the result. So you would have like a high-level summary of what has been passed or failed. And you can have a list. If you double click on a pod, you have a list of all the rules that are failed or all the rules that are successful. But the point is that here, you do not have to go to Visual Expert if you like. You can just keep using Jenkins or GitLab. And with all the tasks in your CI/CD workflow, you can see all the results for all the tasks, including Visual Expert, if that's what you need. So let's see a bit more about these settings that I mentioned. So right here, if we go back to code inspection, we have this profile that is selected here. And if you remember, when I was double clicking here, most of the rules were green, which means accepted, successful, although some of them have problems. This is because we have a moderate expectation, moderate profile, which means that for a certain volume of code, we can accept, it's acceptable for some of the rule to have a small volume of problems. But if I change this expectation and I make it like ideal, for example, and if I do the same, chances are there's going to be more red. Yeah, you see, just a few greens and lots of reds. So that's why you can play a bit with the different profiles and select what is making sense for you. And if you need, you can go right here and select the custom profile where for each rule, you will pick the, the expectation for that particular rule. Okay, then a quick look at something I wanted to show you is this. In case you're using Jenkins, there's a plugin that you can download and install automatically. You don't have to configure or write script or anything. The plugin, as usual with Jenkins, will prompt some question. You just have to check some boxes, enter a couple of values, and that's it. You would get, the output automatically here, list of rules that are failed or not, and the kind of result we mentioned before. Okay, this was for continuous integration. While we're still on the concept of code inspection, which means verifying the code based on rules, there's a specific case I can mention that has been implemented recently. Let's go back to Visual Expert. We've been expanding the list of rules that you may want to use if you need before migrating to PB 2022, R1 or R2. And the reason why we've been adding these rules is that because Appian made some updates in the runtime where PowerBuilder is based on. And you may have a bit more than usual. There's not a lot, but there's a bit more unsupported feature than usual. So to help you migrate and move to PB 2022, we've been talking to Appian and defining this subset where if I'm clicking here by group, one group is related to, it's a group of rules. This is related to PowerBuilder, the migration to PB 2022, and then the concept is the same. You have this rule and you can find non-compliant code and you can fix it anytime you need. So before or after, you can go there. There is obviously the PB migration assistant, but some issues are a bit tricky to find. So Visual Expert is there because we have a very deep, like I said, understanding and analysis of the code. So Visual Expert is coming side by side with the PowerBuilder migration assistant to complete this analysis and detection of unsupported feature and save some time before you move to PB 2022. I wanted to mention that anytime we have, I don't know, let's take an example. Anytime you need to change a method because you find a problem, if you need, you can run an impact analysis. This means show me where this item is used somewhere. So I don't know, let's pick an example. Let's say that I have to change something about this method right here, but I don't know if this is going to have an impact on the rest of the application because maybe this method is used widely. If you run this impact analysis, it will show you exactly where this method is referenced, line number, etc. And this is all the places you might want to check. Before you fix the method, you might want to check the impact on the rest of the application. The impact analysis is a very frequently used feature with Visual Expert. It's available for any type of item in your application. The very frequent case is when you have a table or a column and you want to know where this particular column is used in your application. Same concept, impact analysis, and it will find exactly all the places where this column is used, whether it's on the PowerBuilder side or in the database side, like that, for example.